So I'm here with Michael Mizrahi from the Now Ensemble. Michael has been on our syndicated program, New Music from Bowling Green, in the past. And we have the composer, Sean Fryer, here. Now, Sean, I knew a piece that you wrote for Now Ensemble on an album that came out about 10 years ago, I think, Velvet Hammer, that you did that piece. Now it's been a decade later. You've done a whole album with a really interesting concept that I know you've been thinking about this for a long time, but it seems especially appropriate for what's going on right now in the world and all the uncertainty and the pandemic and what have you, all these questions that people are asking. Now, I've given you a big setup here. You want to talk a little bit about the idea behind this work? It's Before and After is the name of it. 8 different movements. I'll turn it over to you, Sean.
Sure. So yes, as you alluded to, the theme of the piece is about imagining civilizations at different points in their lifespan, from their birth to their demise. And I suppose it could be something you'd look at as a dark theme, but it's also just something kind of inevitable. So I don't think it has to be seen that way. Certainly, when I set out to write this, that was well before COVID. But I think we could probably all find any number of things, in our in our lifetimes that would make us at least ponder these issues. I do have to say that COVID coming around certainly made it seem even more timely. So even though we were ended up being somewhere between a year or 2 years delayed getting the album out from when we originally anticipated it, fortunately the theme didn't seem to go out of style in
Yeah.
that intervening time.
Yeah, totally. Michael, you want to talk a little bit about your collaboration with Sean? I know Now Ensemble, you have composers who are performers. There's a lot of sort of integration of, I imagine, how a composer's piece should go because they're performing it alongside you. Talk a little bit about the Now Ensemble's relationship working with Sean and how this album came to fruition.
Well, you already alluded to one of the core aspects to Now Ensemble is the integration of composers and performers in the ensemble. So Sean is not a member of the ensemble, but we have 3 composers in the ensemble who we work with year in and year out since 2004 when we founded. So one of the most exciting things for me as a performer in the group is to get to work with composers, not just at the premiere, but throughout the whole process. And that's baked into the ensemble. Sean is almost like an honorary member of the ensemble at this point, in that we've been working with him since 2010 on Velvet Hammer, as you mentioned. And in the intervening decade, it's weird to say intervening decade, we've been working with him on and off on this large piece, Before and After. And when I say on and off, I mean workshops, retreats. We spent days, if not weeks, together over the course of 5 or 6 years working through different aspects of the composition. And it felt like, as performers, that we were part of the process almost from the very beginning of its composition. Sean remained the sole composer, but just there was so much back and forth. And we're used to that because we have these composers in the ensemble.
Yeah. Sean, talk a little bit about the piece itself. I mean, Before and After, what does that title refer to? And you've got really interesting titles on all these 8 movements. There's Chant and Frontier and Spread, Cradle, Artifact, Rally, Solo, Done Deal. I got them all right. Yeah.
You did, yeah.
Yeah, and they say something, I'm not quite sure yet what in my mind. I mean, listening to the music helps inform your choices there, but perhaps you can talk a little bit about those choices and how you came to settle on those specific subjects.
Sure. So when well, I guess the way to talk about the kind of genesis of the piece, I came up with the first ideas for it, or not even the musical ideas, but maybe a little bit of the concept during a year when I was living in Rome. And I think part of that was, compared to where I'm from, which is Los Angeles, a city where, if a building is 50 years old, it's time to tear it down, put something new up. To be in a city where for millennia it's built on top of itself, and you really have a sense of everything that has come before you in a much more visceral way than um, I've at least gotten anywhere else I've lived. Just got me thinking about the life cycle of civilizations. And as I started coming up with musical material, I decided that the piece, each kind of movement of the piece would be a sort of vignette or an image of something that I thought was evocative or interesting about just this general theme. So, for example, the opening track, Chant, to me is kind of an evocation of the beginning of a civilization, which is also why not only is it called chant, but musically the materials kind of, I was thinking of medieval chant music when I was writing it. Um, Other movements like Cradle are kind of about nostalgia for the past, whether it's our own personal past or a golden age we think we might have seen or missed. Um, and I could go through all of the others. Spread is one
Yeah.
about uncontrollable growth. That's probably the most chaotic and intense movement. And then, so each one, it's not that the whole piece tells a very strict narrative, but these themes kind of flow from one into the next um, to overall create a 45 or 50-minute piece of music that I thought flowed well, and that each movement belonged next to each other one, and that listening to the whole thing from beginning to end made it a richer experience, say, than just grabbing movements out
Yeah.
of order or not listening to the whole thing.
Right, right. Well, I have listened to the whole thing. And Michael, I wonder if you can talk a little bit about the last movement, Done Deal, because it's kind of piano heavy at the especially at the beginning. Why don't you tell us a little bit about that?
Well, it actually that's one of the most compelling parts of the piece for me is the opening of Done Deal, especially when we're performing the piece live, because there's this sense of apotheosis upon arriving at that movement, which much of the piece doesn't really hover around a specific tonality, but we get this very strong E flat major right there. And what I will say is that Sean writes so uniquely and brilliantly for our combination of timbres. One
Yeah,
thing I love in that opening is the piano's driving everything, but I think almost every note that I'm playing is doubled by another instrument in the ensemble, but it keeps changing. So there's almost this shimmering halo around the piano sound. It sounds almost like a processed piano sound because of the instruments kind of picking out this note here, and then another instrument picks out that note. It's a beautiful synthesis of timbres.
yeah, I totally can see what you're saying. And when I heard it, I thought there was a little bit of processing going on, but it's all acoustic, right?
Yes.
Sean, you can speak
Yes.
to
I
that.
I
mean,
mean,
aside from electric guitar, obviously,
aside
but
from
Yeah.
electric guitar, the entire piece is acoustic.
yeah, I love how you use the guitar for a little distortion, which is very subtle, especially in the second piece and one of the other pieces as well. I can't remember which now, but um, the way that you use those instruments, as Michael says, it's an unusual combination you guys have, a quintet, right? Of
Right.
remind me of what the instruments are again.
It's a flute, clarinet, double bass, electric guitar, and piano.
Yeah. So that's an unusual combination. Hence all the composers you have, writing stuff for you. Sean, what were the challenges in writing for the Now Ensemble and for this instrumentation in particular?
I think for any group like this where it has a unique setup where there really might not be any other ensemble in the world that has the same instrumentation. I think what's exciting about it is also what's challenging about it, which is that there's this opportunity for a really not fresh sounds and a fresh dynamic between instruments that you just maybe haven't heard before. And so I think the most important thing, at least when I'm getting started, is to think about what generally would work really, really well for a group of instruments like this, something that would only work with them rather than, oh, something that actually might be better suited to an orchestra or a string quartet. So to really play to the group's strengths. Um, I would say with often when I write for Now Ensemble, as is Michael mentioned with Done Deal, I usually think of one instrument, which is typically the piano or the electric guitar, as kind of you could say like the skeleton for the whole ensemble sound. Um, and and then I think of all the other instruments as sort of building into it. So even though you have 5 instruments and they can play chamber music all very independently and beautifully, very often I'm trying to create one cohesive sound where it might be a little bit hard to pick out who's doing what. And there's just something I can't even quite say about those 5 instruments and those specific musicians that I just find so tantalizing in terms of the kinds of colors that you can get from the group.
Yeah, it seems that it would be, you know, a challenge, but also very tempting to write for the ensemble and to do it in an idiomatic way, like you're talking about, finding how that combination of instruments works together. Tell me how you guys met in the first place, or how, Sean, you came to be associated with Now Ensemble.
Sean, I
Sure.
think we met for the first time at Princeton, right? We did a residency there. Is that the first time we met?
Yeah, 2009. And that happened that several of the Now members, Judd Greenstein, founding composer, and Mark Danziger, the electric guitarist and also composer, were grad students a little bit ahead of me. And so Now Ensemble came, and that is actually, I wrote Velvet Hammer for that session that you came and played, and it kind of took off from there. It was a great vibe and collaboration, and then you played the piece some more, and then before you knew it, we were talking about a much bigger project.
Yeah, that's great. Are you guys taking any of this on the road? Are you performing in front of audiences right now? Or you have plans for that?
Well, we were able to fit in. The album was just released in the fall, and just before Omicron hit, we had an album release show in New York City. So we felt lucky with that
Yeah.
timing, and it was a great experience. It was a live audience in a fairly small space, a little scary to think about in context of COVID, but they had good COVID protocol there, and it was just so thrilling to play this music for a
Yeah.
live audience after 2 years.
Yeah, that's great. And here we are, you know, a couple of years later, still talking about all this stuff, but we have the music. Thank goodness for that. Well, I want to thank the two of you for spending a little time and talking about this album. It's called Before and After, music of Sean Fryer for the Now Ensemble, which includes the pianist Michael Mizrahi. And where, if folks want to go find this, they can find it anywhere, right? All the usual suspects. Yeah.
Yeah, it's on Bandcamp, and it should also be available on Amazon.
Okay. Well, Bandcamp is always the go-to, I'm told, because they treat their artists nicely. So, yeah.
Absolutely.
We could name all the other streaming services where you can get it, but
Yeah. We'll link to Bandcamp from our website. And if folks want to find you, you both have websites, right, that we can link to?
Yes.
Yeah.
Yes.
Yes.
All right, Sean and Michael, thanks so much for joining us here on FM 91.
Thank you, Brad.
Yes, thanks for having us.